people. That's pretty good. It's more than last week. I am going to get rolling. So my name is Andrew Watson. I am a cycling coach. I've been coaching for almost a decade now, and after retiring from professional cycling, and I am not riding outside. I haven't ridden outside for quite a few weeks. On to the cross country skis now in the winter. So I do a lot of personal coaching, personal training of cyclists. I also do training plans, training consultations, skills development. It's something I really love to do. And there are a couple coordinates there. So again, a lot of eyeballs joined in the last few minutes. We're chatting tonight about nutrition for cyclists, and I want to emphasize or make sure everyone knows where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a cycling coach background. I've sat through many workshops and seminars and conferences with nutritionists, with full-time nutritionists. Sometimes I have PhDs, and I've learned from them, and I'm hoping to transfer some of that information to you. I try to look at not so much as the academic view of nutrition, but the practical view of nutrition and how to incorporate that into day-to-day life or our cycling training. So please ask questions as we go, and you can type those into the chat box or the comments, and I will see those. Tonight's a big topic. And when I was putting this together, I even turned to my partner and said, this could be a 2-parter. And honestly, this could be a 12-parter. People go to school for a very long time to become experts on nutrition. So if you have questions, if I don't get to your questions, if you have questions as we go along, reach out to me. And if there's a common theme, then I can put something together that's maybe a little bit more detailed about one of these areas. So please don't be shy. Please reach out. I know how these go. I've been in the same boat where people will say, hey, looking for topics, looking for questions, and you can't think of any until you're in the presentation or you're in that seminar and the questions pop up. So I think that's going to be kind of what tonight is. So feel free to ask those questions as we go. And I broke tonight down into a few different little subtopics. And daily nutrition for health. I'm a big believer in sports nutrition, and is really just good everyday nutrition. We don't have to change we don't have to reinvent the wheel because we're athletes. There are some tweaks we want to do. There are some things we need to be careful of and watch out for. But really, there's nothing special. There's no magic pill for being on the ball with your nutrition as a cyclist. So I'm going to chat a little bit about pre-ride nutrition, and that could be pre-race nutrition as well. During the ride, during your workouts, during the race nutrition, post-ride recovery. No, that's a big one. Weight, body image, and cycling. Reds. I'm not actually sure exactly. I've heard that said a few times, and if you don't know what that is, stay tuned. Especially if you're a parent. If you're a parent tuning in, you'll definitely want to be tune in and be around towards the end of this presentation. Eating disorders, be chatting a little bit about that, and then I'm going to offer up a few of my recommended resources to anybody to anybody here, anybody watching a little bit later on. Might chat a little bit about gluten. Gotta activate those glutes somehow. Okay. So once again, if you are just tuning in, ask any questions as we go. I'll get to those the best I can. So quickly, I wanted to think of how to summarize my philosophy on nutrition and put it into a few bullet points. And I can expand on each one of these bullet points. You could probably expand each of these bullet points into its own 1-hour webinar. But I'm going to try to summarize as much as I can tonight for you. So you've probably heard this before, but I'm a big believer in consuming a wide variety of foods and fruits and vegetables, multiple sources of protein, a wide range of carbohydrates, if you're limiting your food to just a few types of foods and a few food groups, that's where you could run into issues of not getting quite what you need, not enough micronutrients, that kind of thing. So eat the rainbow. Your plate should look pretty colorful most of the time. Most meals, especially dinners, very colorful plates. If your plates always look like they're one color, kind of yellow, kind of brown, maybe you're not getting as much nutrition as you could. Eliminate as many processed foods as possible. And the old adage is pretty true about grocery stores, is a lot of what you should be filling up your baskets or grocery carts with should be from the outside of the grocery stores. Fruits and vegetables, the meats, non-processed meats, and limited down the aisles. You always have to go down the aisles for certain things, but most of what you're eating should be on the outside of the grocery store. I'm a big believer in eat early in the day, eat often, should almost graze all day, and big believer in multiple small meals a day, and then even if you're not hungry, taper off into the evening. You should be trying to get most of your eating done a little bit earlier in the day, and we'll get to training as well and how to incorporate training recovery. But if your big meal of the day is at 8 o'clock or 8:30 at night, and then you go to bed at 9, that may not be the best. It may not be bad for recovery, but it might not be bad, or may not be optimal for optimal health and weight. Protein with every meal. It's a big one because we don't store protein very well as human beings, or readily available protein. So it's important to have a little bit of protein with every meal that you have. We store fat very well, and we store carbohydrates pretty well in glycogen in our muscles and our liver. But protein and those readily available amino acids to help rebuild our muscles, we don't store those very well. So it's important to keep that protein coming in a little bit in every meal. We want almost that trickle all day of protein. Aim for, if you had to ask me what diet do I recommend, and diet I know is a tricky word, but I would aim for a low glycemic diet or low glycemic index diet most of the time. And I'll get to that. And if you've never heard the term low glycemic until tonight, then that's awesome. I'm glad you're tuning in tonight. We'll get to that, and I'll expand on that a little bit more detail. But basically, it has to do with blood sugar and making sure we kind of keep that fairly steady. Focus on the basics before you really dive deep into the super diets or maybe the trendy diets, keto, paleo, those kinds of things. Like, I'm not saying those are bad, but you want to make sure you get the basics first. You want to get good nutrition down before you start experimenting with some of the new things out there, maybe some more of the fringes out there. Don't deprive yourself of your forbidden fruit. And for me, that's chips. Love my chips. I'm not really a sweet tooth, bit more savory, but I'm a big believer in, you got to have a little bit of that. Maybe not every day, but throughout the week. You got to have a little treat for yourself. Absolutely. And if you deprive yourself of that all the time, then the next time you go for those chips, you're just going to eat the whole bag or the whole bag of cookies, that kind of thing. So everything in moderation. If 99% of your nutrition is dialed, then some chips, some chocolate, some candy isn't going to be bad for you. It's not gonna hurt you or sidetrack you in any way. Another big one, and I got reminded of this, I was on a nutrition seminar the other day about parents and supporting youth. It was learn to cook. If you don't know how to cook and prepare foods and prepare a variety of meals, then it might be tough to have good nutrition. Because good nutrition does come, you got to get in the kitchen. You got to chop vegetables, got to learn how to cook meats in different ways, put those together so that they're you're cooking and effectively, but they also taste good as well. So learning how to use spices, seasonings, all those things. Learn to cook. Learn to be a better cook, and that will help you with nutrition. It will help you become a healthier person if you learn to cook. And for the parents, if there are parents watching this, young athletes, get them in the kitchen with you. One of the things I worked with when I worked with a young group of athletes, I always tried to encourage them to cook for their families once a week. The mom or dad could help, but it was their meal. Mom and dad could shop, but it was their meal to prepare, and once a week. So if you're listening, parents, get your kids in the kitchen. That's one of the best things they can learn from being an athlete is good nutrition. If you're just tuning in, feel free to ask any questions in the comment box as we roll along. So glycemic index, I mentioned that briefly, and it can be a friend and a foe. So I'll chat about that a little bit more. So on the left there's kind of a box with, it's basically a pink background. I Googled glycemic index, and you can find these. And basically, the higher the number, the quicker or the more pronounced your blood sugar spike is. We've probably all experienced that. If you're sitting on the couch, you have a Coke, or you give your kid a Coke, and they get really hyper. So that was high glycemic. A Coke, high glycemic. That's basically 100 on that scale. So day to day, when we wake up in the morning, we actually want to try to go for a lower glycemic. We want to try to stay 50 or below most of the time. And what that's going to do is keep our blood sugar nice and steady throughout the day. Another big reason why I like to graze throughout the day, because there is another factor to this called glycemic load, but I didn't want to complicate things too much tonight. So another thing with glycemic index is you might be looking at that list of foods and see baked potato, 85. So it's the second highest on that list. But if you combine that with lower glycemic foods, which fats, protein, fiber, they all work to lower the glycemic index of the entire meal. And when you see GI in this presentation, that's glycemic index, not gastrointestinal for tonight's purposes. And so if you combine a baked potato with sour cream or butter and a steak or hamburger or something else, the entire glycemic index of the meal goes down. So don't, white rice is still pretty high, but white rice with protein, fats will help lower the glycemic index of the entire meal. And that's what you want to focus on off the bike. Day-to-day nutrition. Remember what I said, day-to-day nutrition is good sports nutrition. And at lower intensities on the bike. Sometimes we want to avoid those really high glycemic foods and sports beverages, things like that. So the types of our carbohydrate intake on the bike and exercising should correlate with the intensity level of our training or our riding. So hopefully that makes sense. High glycemic is, you should be using high glycemic for recovery, especially from high intensity workouts, racing. That's when you can go for that watermelon on the list, or glucose, Coke, Coca-Cola, I should say. That's the time where you can grab a Coke. If you love Cokes, then grab a Coke after a hard workout. That's your time to do it, not at lunch. And you're not riding till the evening, that kind of thing, because that's what spikes your blood sugar. And then I'm going to blow up that slide in the next, or blow up that next little infographic in the next one. So hopefully everybody kind of gets a feeling for the glycemic index and how we can use it to our advantage on both ends. So this is that one infographic that I wanted to just blow up. so that hopefully everyone can read that even if you're on a slower or not slower, smaller screen. And the higher the glycemic index and the higher the glycemic load, the bigger that glucose spike is. And what happens is glucose goes up, our blood sugar goes up, and if we're healthy, our pancreas kicks in and insulin kicks in. Insulin is a hormone that then causes our blood sugar to go down. And often what happens, especially if we don't keep that up or if we're not exercising, it'll actually cause a crash. Our blood sugar will actually dip, which can be counterintuitive. Um, and that crash, we know that we can know that as bonking, and that can happen early, even in a race or a training ride. If you have too much blood sugar before a workout even begins, it's very possible to bonk very early in a workout because of insulin, really. And some of the other things that come about there, you can see blocks fat breakdown, blocks fat burning, stimulates fat storage, and it can cause more hunger for more carbohydrates. So I think they've called it like the sugar cycle or the vicious circle sugar cycle, where blood sugar crashes and then you crave more sugar, and you're on this train. So I see one quick question here. So hopefully everyone kind of gets a feeling for that. There's actually another hormone at play there called glucagon. But I think we all know what insulin is, especially if you're struggling with diabetes or type 2 diabetes. But it's a tricky one. And hormones in general are tricky, and they're always trying to keep us in balance, but sometimes they can overreact a little bit. So quick question: processed sugar, bars, etc. versus high glycemic natural foods, dates, rice, cakes for recovery or during a race. It's a great question. I would go for, if you can get high glycemic from natural foods and they sit well in your stomach, I'm a bigger fan of that versus bars and gels. Now, there is a time though, if you're racing and you can get a gel open and down quicker than you can get a date out of your pocket, there's a practical sense to it where sometimes go for practical, eat the gel, take the sugary drink. But especially on training rides, I find going for the whole food options is better because you are getting a little bit more other nutrition and micronutrients, that kind of thing, and they might just feel better in your stomach as long as the intensity isn't too high. Okay, so hope everyone understands the glycemic index because I might refer to it a few times tonight. But that's really the basis for whenever I think about how to eat for races, how to eat for recovery. A lot of it comes down to glycemic index and making sure that we're getting the right foods at the right times. So looking at the pre-ride, pre-workout, pre-race, and I really consider them almost the same thing other than nerves, which can play a factor, what you should eat for. And I know this was a question. I'm not sure if the person that asked is on here or not, and it comes up a lot. What should I eat for breakfast before a race? And let's say that race is at 10 o'clock in the morning. I would say, what do you eat on a weekend when you're doing a training ride at 10 a.m.? I would eat the same thing. There shouldn't be anything necessarily special about a pre-race meal. You should eat familiar foods. So if you know that you work well on oatmeal in the morning, and that's just a go-to, but oatmeal, French toast, pancakes with fruit, there's a lot of different options out there. Then continue to eat that before your race. Maple syrup is easier in minus 5 degree weather to fuel. Yep, maple syrup. Maple syrup's a great one. That's what I race with now. I put maple syrup, water, and salt into a gel flask, and that's my gel in a race. And yeah, it probably is nicer in the winter. So think about pre-ride, pre-workout, 3 hours to 60 minutes before, and depending on how you handle food, try to move that a little bit closer to your ride or your race. I find 3 hours can be a lot. Like, try to keep brushing that up so it's a little bit closer to your race and you can handle it. You can train your gut like you can train your muscles, and that's part of it. So some of the best riders I know, some of the best athletes, racers, they can devour a huge meal an hour before a 90-minute cross country race and be fine. So it's got to work for you. Everyone's a little bit different. In that pre-workout meal, pre-ride meal, I'd have all those macros in there: some fats, some carbs, some protein. Again, something familiar, low glycemic. We want to avoid that insulin spike. We want to avoid that sugar crash. And remember, we're not warming up yet in the race context. We're getting ready. We've woken up. We're having breakfast before our ride or workout. So for breakfasts, like if we're going to race at 10, then my go-to is like oats with some peanut butter, some full-fat yogurt. That's what FF is. Nuts, seeds, honey. You can do pancakes, French toast, eggs, bacon. Eat things that are toast. Eat things that are familiar to you that make you feel good. And make sure there are some carbs in there too. I know I just said like bacon and eggs and stuff, but toast, hash browns, those kinds of things. Lunch, I would aim for a bit more of a quinoa bowl or a avocado bowl, some beans, some dressing, some olive oil. I would look to something like that. Again, it should work for you, and that would be if you're racing at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, something like that. I'd have a normal breakfast, a normal lunch, and then I'd start warming up for the race or workout or ride. So yes or no to energy drinks? Oh, hey Adam, what kind of energy drinks? If you mean sports drinks like Scratch Labs or Eload, or there's a few of them different, those commercial, then yes, at certain points. If you're asking me about Red Bull or Monster or I don't know what the other ones are that the cool kids are drinking these days, I'd say a hard no to those. They're like rocket fuel. I don't like those. I don't like the ingredients on them. Coke is as hard a drink as I'd ever recommend, and pretty much only for recovery or if you're bonked. Yeah, so Scratch Labs, Eload, there's definitely time for those. It's such an easy way to get carbs, especially when you're racing, to get those sugars in to keep you fueled up. Yes to those. No. So the question here is, so no excessive carb loading pre-race. The reason I say no is you should be fueled up. Basically, on every day you should be fueled up. So I guess the example would be if we're racing on Sunday, which we often do, we really want to be starting to dial in our nutrition on Wednesday, on Thursday, on Friday. And if we're good Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're on top of our fuel, we're on top of replenishing carbohydrates after we do training rides those days. We might pre-ride on Saturday. We replenish, we recover from that. We should be good to go on Sunday when we roll up to the race. Carb loading, it's a bit of a, we used to do that a lot. And I remember, actually, I have an uncle who played college football or university football, and they used to do these big carb loads just before a big game the night before. And we've kind of moved away from that. And like I said, race day nutrition is everyday nutrition. So as long as you're getting good carbs, good recovery throughout the week into the weekend, you should just eat normally. Just good, well-balanced whole meals leading into a race. No Red Bull. So here's another comment. No Red Bull before a CX race? ? So don't listen to Emily Batty. I'm not sure if Emily's ever said to have a Red Bull before a cross race, but So I'll back up a bit. So Red Bull, and I know you might be semi joking, but Red Bull, those things are like, they have sugar in them, they have caffeine in them. You might get a sudden burst of energy, but you'll probably get that crash as well. Plus, man, you get, I don't know, I have had a Red Bull. Man, they just make you jittery, and I don't know if it's worth it. And if you become habitual about it, then all of a sudden you have to have 2 Red Bulls before a race, or maybe 3 Red Bulls before an afternoon race, throughout the day. So I'd say be cautious of that. I'm a coffee drinker. Absolutely. If I don't have a coffee, I don't function. But again, I'm a black coffee or black espresso kind of guy. So, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Red Bull can mess up your stomach. Absolutely. It's just got so much stuff in it. Yeah, I would personally try to avoid that. All jokes aside, I would try to, yeah, like I said, Coca-Cola, that's about as hard a stuff as I'd ever advise in your diet. So we're getting closer to the race or closer to the ride, the workout. So 60 minutes to 0 minutes before our warm up or race, or sorry, workout or race. As we're warming up, so I'm going to maybe talk a bit more about a race, and as we're getting closer to the race, as we're warming up for a race and we're trying to add some intensity to our warm up to get ready for the start of a race, especially a cyclocross race, a mountain bike race, something with a very intense start, that's when you want to increase the glycemic index of what you're taking in. So the simplest way to do that is I recommend what you eat and drink during the race, you should begin to eat and drink that during your warm up. So if you drink Scratch Labs in your bottles, you should have Scratch in your bottles for your warm up. And the warm up should be pretty intense. Like, you want to get your body working, you want to get all your systems firing. And you don't want to go to the start line with your muscles already depleted or your blood sugar already depleted. But be cautious. It's not, you're not overdoing it. But you should be onboarding some carbs, getting ready. Be cautious of gels. They're like rocket fuel as well. I typically don't like to recommend gels before the start of a race. I've seen athletes take gels before the start of a race and bonk on the first lap. Because of that sugar crash, I recommend just maybe some sports drink, maybe a banana, a bar, something again a little bit more dense that will sit in the stomach, at least with a bar. And then once the race starts, then you can start to onboard those gels. So I always like to say you got to get the furnace burning hot before you start tossing in that high GI, because you'll avoid that blood sugar spike. If you're going hard, if you're in the first lap of a cyclocross race or mountain bike race, if your heart rate is at threshold or above, you can take on a lot of carbs and not have the blood sugar spike. So that's important. You're not going to have the same blood sugar spike and insulin reaction if you are going hard, if the intensity is high, because your muscles are using the excess sugar in your blood. So we're burning it before our pancreas kicks in the insulin, in other words. So quick one, told to keep gels for the end of a race. I would actually, everyone's a little bit different and depends on the race, but you could start to onboard gels at the end of the first lap. If we're thinking O-Cup terms, of a 20-minute race, and a lot of it's going to depend on where on the course you're taking it. But you could take that within 15 to 20 minutes of starting the race, because you're probably already tapped into your glycogen stores at that point. And to stay on top of it, if you wait until the end of the race, it might be too late, in other words. So it's almost a little bit better to stay topped up during the race, in my opinion. So I'm going to move on. So now we're on the bike. So we're in a race, or we're in a workout, or on a ride. And this is a very simple way to look at it. but I look at the intensity level of what you're doing. And in a race, it's usually going to be high intensity. There are some examples of or exceptions if they're ultra endurance events, things like that. Maybe it's a little bit more medium intensity. But let's say cyclocross, mountain bike, something short, something high intensity, then we're going to want medium to high glycemic index. That's where we're getting our gels, our cliff shots, our simple carbs, primarily sports drink. And sports drinks can vary as well between isotonic, hypertonic, hypotonic. But in general, we're getting lots of sugar. We got to fuel the furnace, so to speak. On the other hand, is that lower intensity, and again, this is important, is aiming for more that low to medium glycemic index. So if we're just going out for long, slow, steady miles, we might not need the gels, the cliff shots, all sports drink in our bottles. We could actually start to trend more towards that real food. This is what I recommend. Small sandwiches, bananas. My go-to is like a banana wrap with peanut butter. Some of those homemade savory rice bars, maybe the ones with some bacon in them or things like that. Not the sweeter rice bars. And I usually go about one bottle with mix, so Scratch Labs, and one bottle of water. So I'm kind of swapping back and forth, just trying to again keep some carbs coming in, but I'm trying to not spike my blood sugar levels because I don't want that insulin spike. I don't want to have a sugar crash partway through a ride. Okay, so this is a way to help visualize our usage of between fat and carbohydrates. One of the tools out there is called Exert, and it uses actually power and heart rate, or I should say heart rate if you don't have power. But if you have power, sometimes it can give you a pretty good. It's not 100%. It's not the same as getting a metabolic test, but it can help visualize your fuel source in a ride or a workout or a race. So on the left hand, I actually sorted this by 90-minute rides. So every one of those columns is, or I should say every row, is a 90-minute ride. And how many fat grams were used and how many grams of carbohydrates were used during that 90-minute ride. So coincidentally, this was totally a fluke. The top one, you can see the proportion is pretty high to the fat and pretty low to the carbs. And that would have been a low intensity 90-minute ride. It might have been to the coffee shop or back. I didn't actually click on it to actually see what that ride was, but you can see that the primary fuel source was fat, around 840 calories. So simple grade 9 biology or maybe chemistry, you get 9 calories per gram of fat. You get 4 calories per gram of carbohydrates. So primarily fat. So if I finish that ride, I'm looking, at Exert or just anecdotally, I don't really have to worry too much about replacing. It's only it's 23 grams of carbohydrates in 90 minutes. I don't need a lot of carbs. I don't need to have 2 gels, 2 bottles of Scratch, a big recovery smoothie at the end of that ride. Most of that fuel was fat. We all have a good supply of that. So I'm not too worried about replenishing that. Now, on the other hand, and I did check this one out. This was just a hard, basically a 1 hour effort in a 90-minute ride. And about 300 calories of that were from fat, lipids, and 230 grams or 900 calories were from carbs. So in that case, then I know, okay, gotta have some carbs during those rides if I was to evaluate those, if I was to do it again, and also replace those so that I'm ready to go tomorrow or the next day. And really important for stage racing. So, carb loading before a one-day race might look a little bit different than stage racing. So if I knew I was racing the next day, let's say that was a cross race, it wouldn't be quite that high for a 60-minute cross race. Then I know, oh, okay, I need to replenish as many of those carbs as possible for the next day, for the next cross race. So in the right hand column, that's just a different way of looking at the workout, where it kind of breaks that down for you. Again, it's not going to be 100% accurate, but I like it. It's just a good visual cue. I don't try to look at it as precisely exact numbers, but just that good visual cue between, what's the predominant fuel source, fat, carbs. So hopefully everything's sinking in. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask as we roll along, and I'll do my best to integrate those. So recovery. This is really important. And the biggest thing with recovery is eat ASAP. And let's take in, let's say a very long ride or a very intense ride or a race. You want to eat. You want to eat as soon as you stop. You want to start eating and drinking before you stop. You have a really good, they call it the glycogen window. And there's kind of two of them that I want you to think about is within 30 minutes and within 2 hours. So within that first 30 minutes, that's when your body is very capable, is raring to go to absorb and to replenish your glycogen stores. So liver glycogen, muscle glycogen, it wants to store that and recover quickly. If you wait, and then let's go extreme, if you wait 2 hours, if you don't eat for 2 hours after your workout or race, and then you start to eat, your body won't recover as quickly as it would if you ate right away in that first 30 minutes. And I'd say within the first 10 minutes, even more so. So start with, especially for high intensity, start with that medium to high glycemic index, and then start to taper towards a low glycemic index the further out you go. The further out you go to more of just a normal meal, but that first hit of carbs or recovery should be pretty simple. A great go-to low cost is just making your own smoothies. That's what I always like to recommend, with some fruits, some milk. That can be almond milk. That doesn't have to be. It can be dairy-free. Honey, maple syrup as sweeteners, some white rice, some protein powder, and you can kind of go to a 4-to-1 carb to protein is kind of seen as the gold standard there. Again, like I said, always trying to get a little bit of protein in whenever you can, but you don't want to overdo the protein right away. You almost the first priority is that carb. You got to replenish that glycogen with a little bit of protein, then you can start to add a little bit more protein as you go. There are commercially available recovery drinks out there. You can buy them. They're prepackaged. They're great as they store very easily. They're portable. You really just need the mix and some water, shake in a bottle, and you're good to go. I do like I said, I always like to go for the whole foods. And I know that's a bit of a buzzword, but real food versus the commercial stuff. But in a pinch, it works great. Red Ambulance, as some of us know it, is Coca-Cola. I should emphasize that. That's one where I don't recommend that all the time. But if you are cracked in the middle of a hard training ride, or if you finish a really hard race, it can be a good go-to to really get the glycogen up. There's nothing quite like the sugar and the caffeine to get you feeling right. But I wouldn't recommend that all the time. Again, it can be hard on your stomach. But every once in a while, that Red Ambulance comes in handy, as some call it. And then about 2 hours later, so you've had that first glycogen window, 2 hours later, within 2 hours, try to have a little bit more of a solid meal. And I always like to think of it as something lunch-like. So pasta salad, a rice and quinoa bowl, a big sandwich, a wrap. I like wraps. I like sandwiches too, but basically everything that you would put into a sandwich, put that into a burrito wrap, basically, or fajita wrap. That's kind of one of my go-tos, and that's going to be your recovery meal, and then go back to kind of normal eating. Or maybe you have your dinner, maybe you eat that in the car ride home from a race, but then you're going to still have dinner later that evening, or later that afternoon. So hopefully that's all making sense. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to type those in. This is actually going really well, really smooth. Yeah, not doing too bad for time. So inevitably, when we talk about nutrition for cyclists, and we do talk about weight and cycling, and being at an optimal weight, or using cycling and nutrition to lose weight, so that can be a tricky conversation sometimes. But again, I always go back to health first. We want to be healthy individuals, and if we're healthy individuals, then we're going to perform well. We're giving our bodies the nutrients it needs, the carbohydrates, the fats, the proteins to rebuild itself. Then you can start to look at, once you have that dialed in, then you can start to look at maybe a little bit more detailed. Maybe, do you need to eat as many carbs after a ride or a workout? And I get to that a little bit more, but and keeping in mind that all bodies are different. So some people are just naturally bean poles. They don't even have much muscle. It takes them a lot to put on any fat whatsoever. For other people, it's a little bit harder, and that's okay. And both of those people and everybody in between can enjoy cycling and enjoy racing, and get the most out of their cycling. So be cautious of trying to compare yourself to everyone else. Everyone's a little bit different. Everyone has personal anecdote. Years ago, when I was racing full time, I don't know, friends, people used to joke, and probably in poor taste, that I looked like a cancer patient, because I was pretty skinny. And this past fall, somebody came up to me at a cross race and said I really let myself go. So I've heard it all. And I don't know what's right. I don't, maybe in between, I'm not really sure. So I've heard it, but thankfully I'm a coach and know, probably everything in between that's probably okay. And I just try to fuel myself, maybe have a few too many chips here and there. Okay. Oh, sorry. I missed a few questions here. Pizza. Yes. Love pizza. Pizza, if you notice, was actually pretty low on the glycemic index. And I believe I read somewhere that pizza is more nutritious for breakfast than breakfast cereal is. So, like I said, everything in moderation. I love my pizza. You can make pizza pretty healthy. There's a lot of things out there that you can tweak, make them a little bit healthier for you. And yes, you know me. IPA counts for carbs, right? Yes. Yes, it does. Beer has carbs, absolutely. And alcohol actually has a different caloric content than other things. I think it's almost like in between. It's like 6 calories per gram or something like that. Milk and cheese, not sure about that. Would you recommend IF during race season if need to drop weight? Okay, intermittent fasting. Do I recommend intermittent fasting during race season? No, I don't. I'm not a fan of intermittent fasting in how I understand it, or how I think the definition is. Mainly because you might get into that you might not be getting enough to recover from training and workouts. And yes, there's something about fasted workouts to training our bodies to use more fat as fuel. That's a good thing. I'm a fan of that. The one strategy that I've used myself and cautiously use with some athletes is, if we're working in the morning or first thing in the morning, we get up, we're in a fasted state, We might have a black coffee. We jump on the bike and we do our low intensity endurance ride. And then either during that ride we start to eat, or immediately afterwards we start to eat and replenish. But I would never fast after a ride. I would never keep that fast going. That I found is a good, they call it a balanced way of incorporating a little bit of fasting into training. But be very, very cautious with it. I've seen athletes go way too far the other end and just end up being underfueled and not being able to do the workouts, showing up to races not ready to go, that kind of thing. So be very cautious with that. There you go. Everybody has a beach body. Just take your body to the beach. Absolutely. Okay, so back to the few points here. I believe, again, this is me just anecdotally simplifying things as much as I can, that what you eat and when you eat, I actually think when you eat is very, very important, is more important than how much you eat, than the raw calories. So, and the way that I would simplify that more or expand on it more is, really look at what your intake is. What are the foods that you're eating? Not even worry about, don't count calories of them. Just really look at what you are eating. What's the content of what you're eating? Are there processed foods that you could eliminate? Or are there processed foods that you could substitute for whole, real foods? Look at when you're eating. So just a rule of thumb, again, eating early in the day, eating, a good lunch, and not eating too late into the evening, not eating right before you go back to bed, I think is really important. Look at that. If that's all dialed, then you might look to a little bit more detail. Look at how many calories you're using a day, maybe adding up the calories of your intake. Then you can start to look at, get a little bit more granular. And like I said, just anecdotal, I think we don't eat enough, and I know I'm guilty of this, eat enough early in the day, and then we end up being really hungry in the evening, and then we overeat in the evening. I'm not saying don't eat if you're hungry, but if you can try to reset that a little bit so that you're taking a little bit more on in the morning, a little bit more on in the lunch or early afternoon, late afternoon, start to taper that off. I think that's a good healthy way to eat for everyday health. Nutrition for 12, or nutritional demand, energy demand might actually be a better word, for 12 hours a week of training is different than 5 hours a week of training. So keep an eye on that input versus output if you're a low volume athlete, and keep an eye on that input versus output if you're a high volume athlete. They are different. So if you're doing 5 hours a week of training, I think there was something I read, maybe it was about a year ago, saying that sometimes if we're exercising that, 1 hour a day, 4 times a week, that, we have that initial appetite suppression, but then we maybe get a little bit hungry and we might overeat, and we might think, well, we're exercising and we got to refuel, but how many calories are we really using in that 4 hours or that 5 hours a week? So we just want to make sure that's not we're not just treating ourselves because we're exercising. We got to make sure that they do line up, hopefully. Same thing if you're a higher volume athlete. If you're training 15, 20 hours a week, if you're a parent and your young athlete's starting to get up in those hours, then that's a different ball game, and you definitely want to make sure that you're eating enough, and the next slide or another couple slides will go into that as well. Might have another question. Should I change up my eating plan while working 12-hour night shifts? This is a tough one. Or just shift it to match the hours awake. Breakfast at 1800, dinner at midnight. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. I think shifting it might work. But it's that shift in between that I'm thinking about, the transition between one to the other. But I think if you've never tried it, I think shifting the evening shift towards that breakfast routine being early in the evening might be the way to go. But that one might take some experimentation for sure. That's a tricky one. I'm sorry, I might just not have quite an awesome answer for that one. That's a tough one. Okay, so I'm gonna chat about REDS and RED-S. REDS is relative energy deficiency in sport, and it used to be called the female athlete triad, and it comes from a long-term or chronic underfueling, not getting enough energy in for the energy out, and it can lead to several things. I just put a few bullet points here, but some keys are poor bone health. So athletes in REDS often, when they crash, they break bones. Hormone disruption, loss of period for female athletes, and often there's a performance decline, that comes along with being in REDS. Yeah, so I can make sure that Heather's saying you can message Adam Hill if you want to talk about shift work eating. That would probably be an awesome resource. So if you guys don't get connected, shoot me a message and I'll make sure that happens. And the key thing about REDS, and I have eating disorder on the title there, is that it doesn't have to be intentional. REDS can happen with everybody trying to do their best. I'm 90% sure I've been in REDS before without trying. And it can be male or female. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be just females anymore in the female athlete triad, as we call it. We've sport science has come a long way. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And I have a little bit more info on the next slide. The one thing I'd say is that sometimes, not all the time, you can, as an athlete goes into REDS, sometimes there is a performance increase, and that's the scary thing. And I'm not going to throw out any names out there, but sometimes you'll see that the athlete might drop a few pounds, their performance might go up acutely. In the short term, they race really well, but then maybe they race really well for a season, but then the next season they struggle. And that's sometimes an indicator of REDS. Because it is long term, it is chronic. If you undereat for a day, you won't go into REDS. If you undereat for a week, you won't go into REDS. It takes several weeks, several months to go into REDS. I thought breaking bones happens when too heavy. Yeah, maybe that too. But yeah, definitely we want good, strong bones. Okay, so eating disorders. I wanted to touch on this. My partner said you got to touch on it. So, and I think we can all enter our own disordered eating, and that's why even sometimes I'm cautious about intermittent fasting, because if we really think about what are we doing with fasting, and especially if we're talking like 24-hour fasts, that's a form of disordered eating, in my opinion. We're depriving ourselves of food, and that can be a slippery slope. So we want to be cautious of those. So I'd say be cautious of any diet that limits calories. And I know I was talking about making, if you're a low volume athlete, making sure that you're not eating too much. So I know these two slides can contradict each other because it can be tricky. Absolutely. Eating too much, eating too little, finding that balance. But be cautious of any diets that really do limit the calories, that are based upon, okay, you're going to go big calorie deficit for, this training camp. You're going to eat, max 3,000 calories, but you're going to be using 4,000 to 5,000 calories. And after 10 days, you should be a couple pounds lighter. Be cautious of those. Because you want to come out of training camp strong. You want to fuel the training so that you can recover from that training camp and keep building on that training camp, just as an example. Or entire food groups. Again, not to pick on keto, but be cautious of things like that, where we're not going to go any carbs, no carbs, just high fat, high protein, no carbs, low carbs. Be cautious of those. The one thing I'd say, keto does make sense for some cyclists and for some athletes. When I think about ultra marathon riders or ram racers, yeah, like I think being on a ketogenic diet might make a lot of sense. But if you want to go fast on a bicycle, if you race cyclocross, cross country, even marathon, 8-hour races, you need carbs. You need carbs. You need glycogen to go up steep hills on a mountain bike. You need glycogen to go hard in a cross race. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're going to go above threshold, and when you do, you need sugar. Your body needs that to burn. So be cautious of that, especially if you're a fast bike racer, if you want to be a fast bike racer. What is all these ketones that some cycling teams take to boost performance? It's a good question. I believe, and I honestly haven't done a ton of research or reading on them, and I know there's some that want them banned. But I believe a ketone or a ketone supplement basically puts you into fat burning mode and helps transition you to being a better fat burning athlete. And that's not a horrible thing, especially for a stage racer, where you are trying to get through, a 3-week grand tour and you're trying to spare your glycogen. There is an element to being an efficient fat burner, using fat as fuel, that can, help performance, but it can go a little bit too far as well. But again, for the cyclocross racer, for the cross country racer, it's only going to take you so far. It's a bit more on the endurance end of the spectrum. So, do you pop a gel during a 1-hour CX race? Good question. I do. And like I said, I don't know if you were on earlier, I have a gel flask that I use. Like, you can get them on Amazon or Running Store, and they'll hold maybe 200 milliliters of liquid, and I'll put in maple syrup, some water, some salt, and I'll use that. But absolutely, you could take a gel during a CX race. I like the gel flask because I can water it down a little bit more, so I almost get some water and sugar in that 1-hour CX race. But we generally have, and it's a good question because 60 minutes is kind of thought of, or a lot of us look at 60 minutes as the maximum amount you can go max for without needing sugar or an extra bottle or gel or those kinds of things. So if you think about a cyclocross race, it's actually perfectly timed for not needing anything extra. So, Matthew Van Der Poel, those guys can race in an hour 10 without anything. But when we go to a cross country race and the races are 90 minutes, all of a sudden we're trying to get those bottles every lap, or at least taking a swig of a bottle every lap and getting some sugar and some gels. So that 60-minute point is a pretty good threshold almost, and it also gets a little bit better as you grow. So if there's a junior on this call, or a cadet or a younger racer, you might have 45 minutes where you go max. So as you mature, you are able to store a little bit more, up towards that 60 minute mark. Yeah, so that's about how much glycogen we have stored in our muscles or liver before we bonk, in other words. But yes, I still take a little bit more now because maybe I'm more like a 50-minute glycogen stored athlete. So bike stores can get gel flasks too. There you go. I just think of runners and those running belts and stuff. But yeah, the bike shops can set you up there too. Where was I? So parents, be aware of any changes in eating habits of your young athletes, any signs of decreased intake, especially if your athlete's starting to increase their training load. They're train more days a week, but then maybe they're not eating enough to keep up. Just keep an eye on that. Coaches aren't nutritionists. So like I said, second slide, I am a cycling coach. I am not a nutritionist. So, coaches have to be very careful of recommending like caloric restriction or limiting diets, limiting food groups, those kinds of things. So, and coaches have been known to do that. So, coaches are not infallible. So be cautious of that. There are coaches out there who can give some less than ideal advice to young athletes. Youth athletes should not be restricting calories. Just as a blanket statement, U23 or younger, U19 or younger, definitely prepubescent, pubescent youth. You should be trying to get as many calories in, and as athletes, trying to get as many calories in as possible into those young people. Again, the seminar I was in a couple weeks back, when we talk about puberty, it's not something that you can speed up with good nutrition. It's not changeable, but however, poor nutrition, malnutrition can slow puberty down, and can get in the way of some of those hormones and things like that. So making sure that your young athletes are eating enough, keeping up to energy demands, not going into reds, will help keep the puberty processes natural and on track. Adults, so I talked about youth. Adults, small baby steps. Like if we do want to lose a little bit of weight, small baby steps. Think about 5 pounds at a time. Small changes over time can add up. Look at those. Can you eliminate some more processed foods from your diet? Do you need that Tim Hortons double twice a day? Can you eliminate that sugar and cream? Starbucks mocha frappa lappuccinos with 500 or 600 calories. If we can start to cut back on some of those over time can help find those 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds here or there, if that's our goal, if we have that to lose, small steps at a time. And be kind to yourself and others. That's it's very important. Like I said, we're all different. Like I said, my experiences, when I was too skinny, and now I've let myself go. I don't think those people meant anything by it, but it's we our words have actions, or our words have actions, and they mean things to different people, especially for the youth out there. They have enough coming at them, so we want to be able to support them as much as we can and really focus on the fueling end of things. So I think there might be another question. Is there a way to train to maximize glycogen stores? Yes. So I'll answer that one. I'll keep going. Like warm up with drinking water, mixed drink, then do training intervals or whatnot for an hour. Is it like a muscle to train, not to need to drink fuel? Okay, so I think I know where you're going with that. One of the best ways to train to maximize glycogen stores is zone 2 training, endurance training. So when you think about endurance training and volume training, one element, before we even get into nutrition, which I know tonight we're talking about nutrition, is one of the benefits of doing that kind of training, that long, steady distance, is maximizing glycogen sparing and glycogen storage. So keep that in mind. Like as we're training, that's one of the things that we're trying to do. Like warm up with, second part, warm up with drinking water, mixed drink, and do training intervals. It's a tough one. I think other than doing endurance training, if you're doing high intensity training, if you're doing interval training and you're using glycogen, then not replenishing that glycogen isn't going to help you be better at glycogen storage. So I hope that made sense. the better way to do it is to train, do those long endurance rides, and to do them, to be comfortable, to get to a point where you're doing those longer endurance rides and you're not relying on a lot of carbs and a lot of fuel to get through them, so that you can go out and do a 2, 3, 4 hour ride and you're like, yeah, I'm okay. Like, I can just eat a little bit, just graze through it this ride and be comfortable with that. That's going to help your glycogen stores. That's going to train your body to use fat as fuel. But as soon as you do intervals, you're burning carbs and you need to replace those carbs. And if you don't replace those carbs, really the next day you're just going to be depleted. So, I'd kind of look at it that way. If you're going hard, you're using carbs, replace those carbs. Yes. And, like I said, commenting on other people's bodies is, it's not okay. And we have to be very cautious of that as coaches, as co-cyclists out there. Everybody's dealing with struggles, and we need to support each other as much as possible. So, some resources. So, this is my last slide. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. This was the highest attended webinar this year. Funny, nobody wanted to talk about my maximal puke efforts last Monday, but everyone wanted to chat about nutrition. So I don't want to keep you too much longer. We are coming up over an hour. I knew this one was going to go a little bit longer. Some resources for you, some go-to cookbooks. If you're a parent of a young athlete, buy them the Feed Zone cookbook, like the original one. If you need help figuring out which one that is, shoot me a message. I'll shoot you the link. But there's 3 Feed Zone cookbooks written by Alan Lim. Fantastic, simple meals, especially in the original one. Great go-to cookbook. I like the Oshi Glows cookbooks. My partner and I have been kind of cooking out of there. They're very vegan, vegetarian inspired. But at the end of the day, I actually like vegetarian and vegan cookbooks, but sometimes I just add some meat, and that's just me. So you don't have to, go word for word in a recipe. Use them typically a little bit more as guides. Thug Kitchen is another great cookbook. Earmuffs, though. I've never read a cookbook with so much swearing and, swear words in it. If you want to learn more about the glycemic index, the Glucose Revolution is a good resource. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Sorry, I just see any comments. Thug Kitchen is now Bad Manners. I guess maybe that changed the name. Okay. If you Google, it'll probably still come up. It's a great cookbook. I also have, I referred to it when I was making this presentation, was I have a 3-page PDF that I send to all the athletes that I work with. And if you're one of the athletes I work with, I put it all in your calendars for today, so go check it again. It's a 3-page PDF. It goes into a little bit more detail on numbers and amounts and like I said, hypotonic, isotonic, hypertonic drinks and things like that. If you email me or DM me is fine. I will shoot you that. Absolutely no problem. It might help expand just a little bit more on this. If there was anything really specific about tonight's presentation that you want more detail on, or you think would be could be expanded upon, shoot me a message. And really any other topics. Tonight I kind of just try to really generalize a lot and simplify a lot, but some of those topics you could go really deep into. You can expand on them a lot. I tried to cover a lot tonight, so feel free to shoot me a message. And I wouldn't mind doing another nutrition webinar at some point this winter. Don't know what next week's topic is going to be, but we'll think of something. So there's one more question here, which is great. During mid ride stops, should you fuel up a lot to make it back home, or just keep grazing throughout the ride? I usually forget to eat and drink. Happens at races too, and binge at the pit stops for gravel races. Yes, I would hinkle. So if you're starting to, I think the question is like if you're starting to maybe deplete a little bit, you haven't been eating a lot. When you get to that pit stop or maybe a gas station or something mid ride stop, should you eat a lot? Should you kind of just start to graze towards home? And especially if it's higher intensity, I would eat a lot. I would actually really try to fill up, and as much as your stomach can handle. I would try to catch up a little bit. If you start to bonk, or if you start to feel like your sugar's going down, it's better to eat a lot. Get that sugar in, eat what you have, ask your friends for stuff. It's better to replenish that right away than to just kind of graze as you go along towards the end, would be my advice there. Supplements. Yes, that's another topic. I almost put in a page about supplements. And then I was like, oh wow, that could go into a whole other thing. But yeah, supplements could be its own session. And that could be that yeah, there you go. Another vote, supplements. And what to look out for. Some are good, some we get, yeah, that would be another great webinar actually. Yeah, so if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in tonight. This video will be up on Facebook, and I'll also get it up on YouTube for your viewing pleasure and review. Yeah, if you like this, give my Facebook page a like. That way you'll get notified of these webinars every Monday night throughout the rest of the winter into the early spring, 7 p.m. I will be here. And post ride. So another quick one. Do you eat even if you're not hungry? Yes. Post ride. Yep. Especially if it's high intensity, because actually exercise and high intensity can be appetite inhibitor. So it's even more important to kind of try to push through that a little bit and get some calories in. Absolutely, I would do that. Everything endurance above, long rides, intensity rides. Maybe if you're going for a beach cruise for 20 minutes, you might not have to worry about it. But yeah, if it's a good ride, good workout, eat. Yep, fuel up, because you will likely be hungry 2 hours later if you don't. Okay, end of slideshow. Thank you all for coming. All right, no more questions. Everyone have a good night.